I'll just briefly explore two questions with the panel before opening it up to questions from the floor. And I suppose the first thing I wanted to ask each panelist for a comment on, and I mean, lots of the reporting and discussion within the industry I work in has been about the bond structure, the infrastructure bonds. There's been the EU. I think the Commission has offered thoughts on infrastructure bonds as a vehicle, as a way of financing. The Commission itself has published a green paper on long-term financing. That's a part of that is about how we get more investment into infrastructure. I mean, is that the preferred vehicle? Is that the right vehicle to have a bond kind of structure where you obviously have a wide range of investors and other things? I mean, Felipe, is that what you were really referring to in your last slide?
Well, I mean, bonds can help. I think in my last slide in our model, it was really more about sharing the risk. So the idea of having multiple owners owning the last mile asset was to ensure that they share the risk, and these owners would decide how best to raise finance. If some accessing or issuing bonds or accessing these types of instruments was the right way to do it, then so be it. I think the most important thing was the reduction and sharing of the risk, really.
Mikhail, you're a lender, but would you see bonds as part of the?
Yeah, no, to a certain degree, EIB is involved in this type of discussions. There's one initiative called Project Bond Initiative, where in the end we provide a product, a kind of credit enhancement, with the intention to attract bond investors. I think generally speaking, this is a new asset class. Therefore, it is something where bond investors need to get used to it. There's certain risk elements where the traditional bond investors would be reluctant to accept these risks, like the construction risk, for example. And the question is to find the right structure, to find the right mitigants addressing the concerns of potential bond investors. If this is fulfilled, if this precondition is fulfilled, I think, of course, broadband investments could also be financed with the help of bond investors.
Have you so far? I mean, in any of the deals any of the lending that you'd described there, were any of those through bond vehicles? Or
not yet. I think what is currently under discussion for some of the projects is a refinancing by bonds, i.e. where you have an existing cash flow, which in the end almost has a kind of utility character, risk profile. There, I think bond investors would be keen.
From the Commission side, the Project Bond Initiative was planned originally as an intermediate, something to carry us over to the Connecting Europe facility. Now, given that the Connecting Europe facility isn't going to happen, then the Project Bond Initiative has become a higher profile. As I understand it with the EIB, there are now 2 pipeline projects for the Project Bond Initiative within broadband. And the aim here, as I understand it, was to sort of enhance the rating of these projects, to move the senior debt up to an A-class rating. And my impression from our work with the EIB is that the EIB were, if anything, a little bit surprised at how successful they had been. That in general, it's an area where broadband investors had not worked in the past. But that the broadband market is in fact maybe changing and moving in that direction. I would bow to Michael's authority here, but I'm talking of my distance from the EIB.
Thank you. Stefan, in an independent,
and a non-banker view as well.
Yeah, a non-banker view.
So my understanding of the project bond scheme was that it's essentially making something which is marginal, financeable by bond investors, by credit enhancement, as you say. So that would increase the supply of capital for fibre projects, which is a good thing, but it's not going to make a kind of breakthrough solution. It's not going to deal with the Scottish Highlands, for example, where I think we're a long way from the credit enhancement giving us the answer. So it's something that would be useful in the toolkit, but I don't think it should distract from the bigger question, which is what we do with the whole national policy and the areas like the Highlands, which have to be included in the solution at some point.
Okay, thank you. The second question I wanted to just bring out at this point in the discussion, which obviously, Stefan, you raised, but was also mentioned by others, and I'll try and phrase this as even-handedly as possible, since we're in the middle of a referendum process here in Scotland, but is there anything about being an independent country, and let's just assume for these purposes that Scotland is an EU member state, although we could debate that, but let's not. Let's assume, is there something about being a smaller member state that might give you any potential advantages? And equally, on the other side, is there anything about the sort of being a larger member state and a well-established member state that might give you an advantage in securing funding for this kind of investment? So, Stefan, you posited the thought of independence. I've twisted it slightly by requiring you now to imagine that it would be an EU member state. But
yes.
Anything you'd like to say in addition to your presentation?
It's an excellent question, Mr. Chairman. I think a lot comes down to politics, essentially. I mean, New Zealand, I don't know the ins and outs of the UFB scheme that you mentioned in your presentation, but it would seem to me they follow a very similar logic to the one I've developed. And as an independent country, they wouldn't have a concern about state aid. So state aid is a requirement that's come from the EU for the single market to avoid one government dumping into its steel industry lots of money and disadvantaging others. Applied to telecoms, it has slightly perverse effects, one might argue. But a lot comes down to interpretation, because I know that in this country, my observation going around Europe is that this country is particularly pedantic, I think is the polite word for in its approach to state aid. And I think you said that the UK doesn't understand state aid very well, so perhaps you'll elaborate on the exact way in which we've failed to grasp it.
Okay, we'll come back to state aid, but just go back to the independent country. I'm not going to get into what will happen if we vote for independence, whether we'll be part of the EU or not. Actually, I cannot see any way in which we wouldn't be part of the EU. And rather than look at the politics of it, I would look at the economics of it. If we're not part of the EU, then what's the alternative?
Well, let's assume for the purposes of this conversation that it would be an EU member state.
Or the European Economic Area is the next option. But even so, I think we are as much tied into the regulatory framework of the European Union, which is going to be critical for our markets anyway. Within that, then, the question is there an advantage to being a small nation or a big nation? Most successful nations in Europe in terms of broadband penetration and usage are the small Scandinavian nations. It's Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Netherlands, who are top of the league in terms of broadband. So in terms of results, smallness seems to matter. In terms of playing the EU game, then I think then size does matter. I think that in terms of influence in the regulatory process, influence in the budget process, then it's certainly the case that what Germany, France and the UK say matters more than what the smaller nations say. I think that's the political reality. And if I can have one more, referring to the state aid, the problem, it seems to me, with what the UK's done with state aid is that responsibility for broadband in the UK is now with Department of Culture, Media and Sport. It was placed there after Vince Cable said some unwise words about News International. They moved broadband to DCMS. They left state aid responsibility for broadband with BIS, the Department of Business, whatever it's called. And it seems to me that, I don't know whether that's the factor, but since then, the UK has not done very well in explaining and getting its state aid notifications over. In terms of its record, you will probably all have heard of the Birmingham case, which we gave notification approval for, and has then been appealed against. We had the two cases that I mentioned on BD UK and then the Urban State Aid Fund. DCMS announced enormous investments in rural, then city, then mobile, and they've not succeeded in getting that through the state aid process. That's what I mean about not playing the game very well. And I think some other countries actually play this game a little bit better.
Thank you. Felipe, economist's view, if any?
I don't think size should matter. The rules of the EU are the same for everybody. The telecoms framework is the same in every country. It has to be applied international law. So it's good policies and good ideas that should matter. Now, whether that is actually the case in the world of European politics is a different matter. But
thank you. Mikhail, any comments?
Just a short statement. As a banker, I think not the size of the country is important. It's in the end, its ability to attract investors. Yeah.
Could I just perhaps ask you a question about one of your slides? I think I understood it. You were showing where the loans had gone by percentage, and Italy seemed very high as a recipient of lending from the EIB. Is there anything we can learn from that at all that you're aware of? I think they were right up there at 22% or something.
It is, in the end, with regard to the distribution of our lending, we try to achieve a fair balance between all member states. And it could be that, in particular for broadband investments in Italy, the ratio is higher compared to other countries. Yeah, but this is unbalanced or mitigated by our activities in other segments.
Oh, okay, thank you.